farmers market is first on the agenda. So I think I will hand that over to Michelle, and Alicia are leading that session.
Thank you, Amanda. Good morning, everybody. I'm Michelle Brown with MainStreet Hanford, and I'm happy to introduce Catt Fields White. She is the founder and CEO of Farmers Market Pros and Tent Talk co-host. Welcome, Catt. Catt started the Little Italy Mercato in 2008 as a source of fresh food for her urban neighborhood, and grew it into San Diego County's largest weekly year-round farmers market, which I've had the pleasure of attending. She's a lifelong market fan turned operator. She founded Farmers Market Pros to make the journey easier for small farmers, food makers, and other market managers. Catt also being a co-host for the Intense Farmers Market, which I also had the pleasure of attending in 2018, has so much to offer us today about farmers markets. So please have your questions ready for her. And with that, Catt, I'm going to share my screen. And let's see here. And I'm going to hand it over to you, Catt.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me this morning. I think farmers markets and main streets are both very focused on understanding clearly how acting locally affects things globally. And that's kind of where we have control, right here in our own communities. As Michelle mentioned, I'm a farmers market developer and operator, in addition to having founded an educational organization that helps farmers market managers throughout the US, Canada, and beyond to manage markets, and helps farmers and small food makers and crafters to support themselves by participating in this perfect example of what a small business can be. We develop farmers markets that bring farmers to the city. I'm gonna let you stay on that last slide, Michelle, if you don't mind. I'll tell you next, maybe when we switch. Sounds good. We bring farmers to the city and people to the table, we say. I started the Little Italy Mercato in 2008, primarily because I had moved to an urban neighborhood and had no way to buy groceries. I could do anything without getting in my car except buy groceries, no store in that neighborhood. Little Italian delis, but man or woman does not live by prosciutto alone. So it was time to bring fresh food into the neighborhood. That market thrived, partly because the neighborhood needed groceries, partly because it was at that moment in time a bedroom community to the financial district, and people didn't come out on Saturday morning. And it really created a way to get people out of their mid-rises, down onto the street, and getting to know their community members. At this point, that market is almost 14 years in. It's the largest in San Diego County. It's one of the largest in the US. We have 180 vendor tents on the street. We stretch over 6 city blocks. And we attract roughly 20,000 attendees per Saturday, 52 weeks a year, 51 this year since Christmas falls on a Saturday. In addition to that, I work with the steering committee of the California Alliance of Farmers Markets, and I'm on the leadership forum of the National Farmers Market Coalition, and just now getting involved with the fledgling World Farmers Market Coalition, which is aiming to base the American model of farmers markets to develop markets in some other countries. I also realized as I went along that we were spending a lot of time with people who would contact us, farmers or vendors, and say, I'd like to sell at a farmer's market. How does that work? It was a lot to cover one by one on the phone or via email. So in 2010, we started a program called Vendor 101. It's since, thank you, COVID, morphed into an online class. One of those silver linings of the pandemic, we took it out of the classroom and online, and it's enabled us to reach a lot more people. It's a 6-hour class that lets farmers and vendors determine the feasibility of whether it makes sense for them to operate at a market. And if it does, and they decide to move forward, walks them through the permits, business organization, fundraising, and market operations so that they can be a success. Our next class up is Market Manager 101, which will be released in the spring. Pretty much when Gamaro and Alicia contacted me, they said, can you tell our folks about this and this and this and this and this? And I said, oh yeah, that's an 8-hour class. We're going to be doing that online soon. But I'm talking fast, and we're going to fit this into 20 minutes this morning. So we're going to give you at least a good, strong overview of what you can do to help your community and help your community organization by developing and operating a farmers market. We do those online classes under the umbrella of Farmers Market Pros, where, as Michelle mentioned, we also operate an annual conference, Intense, the Farmers Market Conference. Get it? Intense. That attracts people from all over the US. We get a lot of Canadians, either because we have really sterling content or because it's always in March in San Diego. And who doesn't want to be in March in San Diego if you come from a snowy place? We also get folks from the UK, but primarily we have US attendees, including some folks that are connected with MainStreets and other business improvement districts, organizations that would be the host for farmers markets. It lets them learn what their market managers need to know, and it gives them direction in terms of helping those market managers to succeed, both for the market and the market participants and their communities. And then lastly, we do a weekly podcast called Tent Talk that interviews farmers market managers from all over the country, small farmers, vendors, and sometimes it's just the three of us, my cohorts and I, talking about topics of interest to folks that manage farmers markets. Very niche, but we have a really large number of followers. I was sort of dragged kicking and screaming into the podcast world. I'm a reader, but my team convinced me that we needed to do this, and it's been an amazing way to increase our outreach. So Michelle, next slide, please. What we found out, especially during the pandemic, those of us in farmers markets already knew it, but as the pandemic got more and more stressful and things started to close down in early 2020, it became really obvious that farmers markets are essential. Broken supply chains in terms of international shipping and shipping things across the country broke down. There was little availability of meat, for instance, because the packing houses were having a hard time with putting people close together to manage butchery. Fresh food was not traveling across the country since shipping chains were broken. And people were frankly afraid to shop indoors for a period of time there. So as we worked with California state government and then our local counties and cities to establish protocols, a lot of people found that farmers markets were the way that they could access nutrient-dense, fresh food, shopping outside under safe protocols. It took a lot for the farmers market operators. We fenced off the perimeters of our markets. We made the markets smaller overall. We spaced vendors out widely, and we managed to keep people safely fed throughout all those heavy protocols. Those have lightened up. Some now, we're still being careful. We're still suggesting that people wear masks in a crowded market. But at this time in California, we are open. Shopping outside is recognized as being a safe way to get food. But farmers markets are essential for other reasons as well. Keeping farmers farming being the primary one. We had American Farmland Trust at our conference last year, and as their president pointed out, no farms, no food, and perhaps more harrowing, no farms, no beer, no farms, no wine. All of those things come from fruits and vegetables and grains that come out of the ground. So it's important that we help small farmers keep farming. Financially, the California direct marketing laws were created to keep those farmers farming by giving them a better level of financial sustainability. If you go to a supermarket and you buy an avocado for $1, roughly 11 cents goes into the pocket of the guy that's bought the land, watered it, paid for labor to harvest it, kept it rolling, and gotten it through the broker, through the distributor, and to the grocery store. Buy that same avocado for $1 at the farmer's market, and $1 goes in the farmer's pocket. He may have a little bit of rent that he pays for his stall. He has to be there working. He keeps the retail price of that product. And that makes an enormous difference in whether or not farmers can survive, especially in a state like ours where land and water are extremely expensive. Taking a wholesale price for their products puts them at risk. Farmers markets bring communities together. As I mentioned in Little Italy, we had tons of neighbors that had no idea who the guy who lived next door was. Bringing them together on the street on Saturday mornings helps those communities coalesce. It grows small business and it increases employment. Farmers markets are great business incubators. If you've got a strong farmers market manager that's helping their farmers and vendors learn the ins and outs of business, those businesses often grow into larger businesses that participate in a lot of markets, or even bigger businesses that sell wholesale, that sell to local retailers, that sell online, and sometimes scale into their own brick and mortars. All of those things make your community stronger, and it keeps local dollars local. So when somebody buys their groceries at a farmer's market, that money goes into the pockets of farmers and food makers that are spending their money down the street at your restaurant and down the street at your boutique, as opposed to going into the coffers of a large chain grocery store whose headquarters may be half the country away and doesn't have any effect on the money going into the sales tax dollars and the things that fix your streets and support your schools. So keeping those dollars local is a huge benefit of farmers markets. Next slide, Michelle. So if you're thinking about starting up a farmer's market, and I'm assuming that a fair amount of you have a market that's going. So we're going to talk about startup, but keep in mind that all of these things can be applied to an existing market that maybe needs to be revved up, that maybe needs to be revamped. So you can look back maybe at how you started and look back at what you may have skipped as you were moving along to open and what you can do to really rev up your market. So startup requirements, first and foremost, is grocery shoppers. We get a lot of outreach from developers, from communities that say, we'd love to have a farmer's market here. Our first question is, why? Do your folks need groceries? And oftentimes the answer is, we just think it'd be a fun way to get people together. And it is, absolutely. Nothing more fun than coming out to the farmer's market. But if that's your primary and only reason for starting a farmer's market, that's not going to be sustainable. Those farmers and those vendors have to sell their goods. Somebody has to be buying groceries or they can't keep coming back. So we have a fairly detailed feasibility study that we do with people that outreach to us in terms of starting farmers markets to figure out, do you have grocery shoppers there? And a lot of that will be affected by putting your market in an appropriate location. Hiding it away, whether it's on the backfield of a schoolyard, occasionally successful, but generally speaking, not so much. What you need for a location for a farmer's market is exactly what you need for any other retail operation. Location, location, location. You need visibility. You need a way for people to get there. And you need a physical plant for your farmer's market that will make it possible for your farmers and vendors to pop up those 10 by 10 tents, for your market manager to map it out and create aisles, which is how Americans are used to shopping, and will allow room for your farmers to keep their cars if they're selling citrus or meat or heavy items. So there's a lot that goes into determining an appropriate location for a market. The basics, of course, is that you have to have a minimum amount of linear feet so that you've got a big enough market to create critical mass to attract those shoppers. Startup funding is important for markets, just as it is for vendors. You can start a market on a shoestring. Likely it will either fade or stay very, very small. If you want a successful market, you're going to have to invest in creating that market initially. So some of those initial expenses are equipment, permits, depending on your county and city and what's required there. Those are very expensive in San Diego. In some areas, not so much. That traffic control equipment, insurance has become a major expense for farmers markets. Marketing, devoting your plan to include a significant level of marketing is important. You have to keep those people coming back, especially in those early years. And then staff time for recruiting, for developing relationships with farmers and vendors, with creating the environment and the offerings that will bring customers there week after week. And then there are multiple permits that are required, and this varies widely depending on your individual community. There's no state permit per se for a farmer's market, although the California Department of Food and Agriculture does require every market manager to submit a $2 fee per week that the market operates for each and every vendor and farmer. That's what the CDFA requires to fund their inspection program for farms. So even if folks are selling coffee beans or sweaters, there's still a $2 fee that goes to the state every week that they appear on your street. That's the only state requirement, but there are typically a fair number of permits that you have to apply, from ag department permits from your county, Department of Health permits typically from your county, sometimes a city permit or a street closure permit. So there's a lot that you've got to figure out there. It's something that takes time. It's not an overwhelming percentage of the cost of a market startup, but it does apply. Next slide, Michelle. We'll see if we can get through this 8-hour class in 4 more minutes. So what do you need to keep a farmer's market running? Michelle, you got the next slide? There we go. So you're going to need a professional manager, or you're going to need to train somebody in your operation to professionally operate a market. There are a fair amount of farmers market management businesses like mine at San Diego Markets, like Brian's, like PCFMA up in the Bay Area. There's groups that do nothing but manage farmers markets. And typically that kind of operation will be managing a multitude of markets in a particular area. So you can hire them, those work various ways. You can pay them a fee, you can split the net. There's a variety of ways that those work. If you've got a fairly small market in mind, if you're in a small community and you're going to have maybe 20 or 30 vendors there on a weekly basis, you may be able to train an internal staff person to operate that market. And that's not a bad idea. We've actually started markets for various neighborhoods and then helped them hire somebody, trained that manager, and turned it back over to them. But don't just pick your Parks and Rec person or somebody that's been doing accounting at your association and toss them in the pool without lessons. Do make sure that you provide training to somebody internal that's going to run the market. There's a lot to know to do it. Farmer and vendor relationships are a primary key and indicator of whether or not your farmer's market is going to be successful. One of the reasons that people hire professional market organizations is that we maintain those relationships. For farmers and vendors to come out of their businesses, to come off of their farms and show up on the street, they need to trust that the person organizing the market is going to do a good job of attracting customers, of protecting their interests, of making sure that permit requirements and local rules and regulations are met so that they don't end up in trouble. And that makes a big difference in terms of how fast your market ramps up, how you've developed those relationships. Again, internal staff member can definitely do that, but they're going to need some guidance to do it. You need to determine a fee structure and operating protocols. Those fee structures vary in much of Southern California. Fees charged are based on a percentage of sales, usually with a base guaranteed rate that goes to the market operator, and then a percentage of the sales that each person makes. My organization actually does flat fee markets for a whole variety of reasons. We don't have the hour for me to explain all of those, but we typically charge a flat fee to be there no matter how much they sell. There's a lot of very specific reasons we do that. Either way, you need a consistent fee structure that applies to each of the categories in your market. And you need consistent operating protocols and that mom-oriented kindergarten teacher kind of mentality to clearly communicate what those protocols are, what the expectations are, and then to very consistently enforce them so that whether or not that farmer is a favorite of yours or whether or not that vendor makes the best macaroons ever and slips you a few free ones each week, everybody's still got to abide by the same rules. And that's how you make a happy market. And then marketing is your other essential component. No matter how delightful your market is, people are busy. They've got a lot of options when it comes to grocery shopping. They've got a lot of options when it comes to gathering. And consistent, obvious marketing is important to keeping that market thriving. Even long established markets need to do that consistently, especially at the beginning though. Devoting a budget and time to marketing is critical. We 14 years in at the Little League Mercado are still posting to Instagram every day. We still write and email a newsletter every single week that has recipe links and talks about the farmers and vendors. We do analog things like posters and flyers in local coffee houses and restaurants and shops. We mail newsletters and postcards, and we do a lot of community outreach. When our local school is doing a chili cook-off, we'll have a booth there with vegetables for the chefs to choose from to make their chili. So that constant marketing is key to keeping your farmers market thriving for the long term. Next slide. So what's in it for you? There's a lot of time and expense involved in starting and operating a farmers market. Why would a MainStreet want to invest in that? One of the reasons is net income. Farmers markets, in addition to being good community gathering places, can be a significant source of fundraising. We have started markets and we still maintain markets that generate anywhere from over $250,000 a year to the association that's our host for our largest farmers market, to on a very regular basis in smaller communities with weekly markets, usually weekday markets, anywhere from $20,000 to $35,000 or $40,000 a year. That can be a significant part of your operating budget. And the good news is, as long as the market is self-sustaining and you're not taking city funding or county funding or grant funding that's specifically designated for something else, those are unrestricted funds. What makes my Business Improvement District and MainStreet partners very, very happy is that the money that I bring into them can be used for anything they want. It doesn't have to be designated specifically to maintenance assessment issues. It doesn't have to be designated specifically to operations. They can use them to plant flower pots that go on the corners. They can use them to power wash the sidewalks. they can be used any way they want. So unrestricted funds, as you know, if you're a Main Street director, is a delightful thing. Cross-marketing and visibility for your community is really important. The Little Italy Mercado is on National Geographic's top 10 list of things to see in San Diego. This brings an enormous amount of visibility to Little Italy as a community. And we do a lot of that. We get a lot of coverage. Farmers markets are pretty. People that shoot commercials want them in the background. People that want to write about an area love to include the farmers market because the shots of fruits and vegetables and people gathering are attractive. And so we always make a point in our marketing to call out the restaurants where you can have lunch after you attend the market. We do cross promotions with our local wine shops and point out that pick up your ingredients and make a great meal at the market and stop by Filippi's and get a bottle of wine. So having a manager that keeps that in mind can eliminate a lot of the conflicts that sometimes come with a new market between local brick and mortar businesses and the market operation. So that cross marketing can be really valuable to both. And then of course, farmers markets are the ideal business incubator. So there's a fairly low barrier to entry. It is not free to start a farmers market business. That's the basis of our Vendor 101 class. I know there's a lot of tents, but this is not camping. It really does involve a lot of permitting and organization and running a true business. But what happens is we teach people to run good businesses. And we have seen a fair amount of people come out of our farmers markets and create brick and mortar businesses in the communities where they've sold at the market. So adding to your membership base, adding to sales tax in your neighborhood, adding to your local business group, oftentimes is a side benefit of having a successful farmers market. Like Main Street organizations, farmers markets grow community. And a farmer's market can be a terrific addition to your organization. And I think I made it in the allotted time to provide some time for questions and answers. And I'd be happy to answer anything that you'd like to ask. And Michelle, I don't know if you want people to drop questions in the chat, to raise their hands and unmute them, but you or Alicia, whoever's managing that, take it away.
I can look at the chat, or if people want to raise their hands, I can keep an eye on that as well. I actually have a question, Kat.
Sure.
I did attend the Intense Farmers Market conference when I first became the director of Main Street Hanford, and I really enjoyed it.
Great.
So I was curious if you could give us just a quick overview of what topics might be covered at your upcoming conference in March of 2022.
Sure. We are back in March of 2022 live. And of course, now that everybody's attended a million virtual conferences, we are also going to be virtual. So it'll be a hybrid. My staff is really excited to do twice the work of producing both an in-person conference and a virtual conference, as I'm sure many of you are doing with your events at this point. We typically devote a certain amount of time at that conference to nuts and bolts things. How to start a farmer's market, how to create a budget for your market on an annual basis. We have some very specific sessions on hiring and training, which has become a challenge for all kinds of businesses. We also usually have some inspirational sessions. So we've got Richard McCarthy, who will be here to talk about the World Farmers Market Coalition that's starting up now, along with his committee coming from Italy to San Diego to talk about those things. We're talking about DEI issues, as we did last year. We had a great update from the folks that are working with Farmers Market Coalition to create a Farmers Market anti-racist toolkit to go alongside the Farmers Market legal toolkit. So we'll have that coming up, and looking at how our application processes and our hiring processes and our marketing may be creating an impression that markets are not inclusionary. So that's always an important part of our program. Yeah. There's a lot. Oh, and we've got Sarah Delvan, who is a consultant that works mostly with small food makers, but her precepts and her concepts are well applicable to managers as well. And she'll be talking about the Profit First program. So the idea that you really want to make sure that you pay yourself and then back things back from there in terms of how you cover your expenses. So we want to make sure that farmers markets and the participants in farmers markets are financially self-sustaining. This is, we say passion meet profit in our Vendor 101 class, because these are both events and businesses that you can be really excited about and have a lot of passion for. But if you're not supporting yourself by doing them, they're not going to continue.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kat. It looks like we have a couple of questions. Audrey Taylor wants to know, have you dealt with mobile farmers markets for rural underserved areas?
We do not host mobile farmers markets, primarily because that's a bit of a contradiction in terms for people that run traditional farmers markets. And there's a lot of conversation about this in our leadership forum at Farmers Market Coalition. A farmers market is by definition a market where there are farmers present. So we're highly in favor of mobile healthy food markets, but those are not farmers markets unless you've got a farmer on your truck. So we don't typically do that. I know that there are a couple of organizations up in the Bay Area that are doing really effective mobile farmers markets. I've seen them in other parts of the country. It's not something that we organize since our primary mission is bringing the farmer and the consumer together. We do look at establishing farmers markets in underserved areas in terms of food apartheid and people that are in lower income demographic areas. And we find that really important. And at the same time, we find it really important to not expect farmers to be philanthropists. So if you're going to create a market in an area where they're not going to be able to generate full price sales as effectively, you need sponsors. So you need somebody that's going to be able to supply market dollars to the lower income folks in that area so that they can still buy from farmers at full price, developing a habit of eating healthy food and supporting both the farmers and the community that way. Asking the farmers to pull out of a market, they've only got so many staff members typically, pull out of a Saturday market to go in an area that can afford to buy what they're selling and go into an area where it's going to be a struggle is a lot to put on farmers. Farmers are themselves often on the border of the poverty line. So you just need to remember that. But we are strongly supportive of putting markets in areas where there are not other fresh food opportunities. All of our markets take EBT and SNAP as well, and we participate in market match programs so that when somebody swipes their SNAP card, they're given a match amount that they can use for fruits and vegetables that does not apply to their balance.
Okay, thank you. We have another question from Katie Valenzuela. I hear this question a lot among market managers. How do you address animals in the market, non-service dogs and other emotional support animals?
Well, this is every conference, there's a market manager roundtable, and every roundtable devolves into talking about dogs at markets. So we try to keep emphasizing to people that farmers markets are grocery stores. And if you wouldn't take your dog to the grocery store, please don't bring your dog to the farmer's market. Obviously, we never restrict service animals. The state, during heavy duty COVID protocols, since we had to seal the perimeter of our markets and count the number of people in and out, our city also demanded that we not allow dogs in the market. We made some very rare exceptions for actual trained service animals. We got more heavily into asking questions about those than we ever have in the past because we're always walking that tightrope between dogs at the market, which create, in my opinion, not that big a hygiene issue as much as a trip and fall risk. Which is why we don't like to see the dogs at the market. People trip over those leashes. Emotional support animals were not covered under that city protocol. And so those were some really difficult conversations for our staff to have. But this is an ongoing issue in farmers markets. And I know we've got a few farmers markets out there in our farmers market pros community that love dogs and encourage people to bring their dogs to the market. But we, for a variety of reasons, do not. And if you want, Michelle, I can just respond to some of the things in the text just because in the chat, just if we're running out
I'll
of time.
let you take over.
Great. So Bob Branson asked, critical mass, how many vendors would that be? Would that vary between rural and urban? Very much varies between urban and rural, Bob. I would say you can run a farmer's market that will yield net to your organization with as few as 20 vendors, if those are carefully curated vendors so you still have a balanced market. And if you're in a small enough town that the critical mass of 20 vendors and whatever activity you have going around them is enough to pull your citizens away from the other events and other grocery opportunities that are going on in your area. For my organization, we typically will not run a market. We'll set them up and we'll train somebody to do them, but we won't manage a market of less than 45 vendors. That's the very smallest we go. We typically recommend 60 to 80, but we're working in a fairly large urban area. If you're in a smaller city or town, 20 to 30 vendors actually can form a very successful market and one that yields some profit as well. Isaac Kramer asked, do you help markets with organizing local food production like Local Foods, Local Places program EPA focuses on? I'm not sure I understand that question, Isaac, so I'm going to come back to that. If you want to give me a little bit more explanation, I'm not familiar with Local Foods, Local Places. We certainly, in California, the only people allowed to sell fruits and vegetables, any kind of produce, nuts, herbs, and cut flowers at a farmer's market. Farmers markets are certified by the state. only California growers can sell at those markets. So they are definitely local. The interesting thing in California is we're a very large state. So for San Diego, if we wanted to have truly local 100-mile diet kind of farmers, we should be bringing farmers of high integrity in from Mexico. Mexico is 30 miles from us. Instead, we have farmers coming from Northern California that honestly drive 400 miles to participate at our Saturday market. So local can be defined a number of ways. The state defines it as California. So that's got a little bit of effect on it. Christine Davis says, we were thinking of starting EBT or WIC. It looks complicated. We do accept those programs. I absolutely recommend that you accept those programs for a number of reasons. One, obviously, is humanity. You want to provide programs that help people balance their food budget. There's a lot of people that can't afford fresh food if the only way to get it is at grocery stores or without using EBT. Very, very important. WIC is a program that's actually coordinated through USDA and the farmers. The market doesn't get involved in that other than we have to be certified to host farmers that accept WIC, but we don't actually take it. EBT, we manage. You come to our info booth, you swipe your SNAP card, we give you script that's good at any farmer or grocery vendor. So we do that. There's no upcharge for it. You can't make a profit on EBT in any way. What you will do in terms of actual financial effect by taking EBT or SNAP is that you will increase your sales significantly. So your farmers and vendors will sell a lot more. That brings more farmers and vendors to your market. It enables them to pay higher rent fees as the market develops. So financially, it's a great idea. In terms of being a good human, it's a great idea. How do we promote our farmers markets to younger audiences? Here in Chico, we'd like to improve our engagement with the university students. That's from Mason Penstein. We market to the university. So we are in university newspapers. We show up at university events to set up tables. We hire university students who tell their friends to come to the market. So we've actually found a huge interest in that demographic, in young people, in college age people, in eating fresh food. And they understand the effects of small farming on climate change and the fact that small farmers actually can capture carbon and will help climate change kind of shift around. They're very tuned into that, much more than we boomers are. So it's really easy to approach them with the idea that supporting small farmers is not only going to give you better tasting food, but it's going to save the world. Is there a digital gift card platform we like to use? No, there's not. We actually use analog gift cards. They're printed just like little business cards are. We sell them at the info booth and people use them at any booth in the market. Don't use a digital card platform. Digital card platforms are a little bit tricky when the money is being taken by each individual farmer and vendor. So that might be something that we address at our conference, but I can't tell you right now. And Isaac, I think I'm out of time, so I'm not going to be able to look at this EPA link that you sent, but I will look at it. And if you want to contact me using the email on the screen, I'd be happy to talk to you about that.
Thank you so much, Kat. I'm sure everybody wishes that we had more time with you.
Well, more time with me means signing up for that Intense, the farmers market conference. So
there you go. And all
we'll see this in
information.
March. And of course, I'm available via email, via any of those links. We do one-on-one consulting with organizations and with market managers. So feel free to reach out.